August 1914, a world goes to war. The summer of 1914 began with an air of optimism. Europe, a continent of empires and burgeoning industrial might, basked in the sun's warmth, oblivious to the gathering storm. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Nationalism, imperial rivalries, and a complex web of alliances created a volatile mix. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne on June 28, 1914, shattered the fragile peace. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding satisfaction for the assassination. Serbia's partial acceptance was deemed insufficient. On July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, setting in motion a chain reaction that would engulf Europe and beyond. Within days, the great powers of Europe mobilized their armies. Germany, following its Schlieffen Plan, aimed for a swift knockout blow against France. Russia mobilized in support of Serbia, its fellow Slavic nation. Great Britain, initially hesitant, declared war on Germany on August 4th, following the German invasion of neutral Belgium. The world watched in disbelief as the guns of August roared, marking the beginning of a conflict that would reshape the world. Few could have imagined the scale of the carnage to come, or the years of brutal warfare that lay ahead. Illusions of a swift resolution, the myth of home by Christmas. This phrase encapsulated the widespread belief that the war would be short-lived, a mere blip in the grand scheme of history. The outbreak of war in 1914 was met with a wave of patriotic fervor across Europe. People from all walks of life were swept up in a tide of nationalism and duty. Young men, eager for adventure and a chance to prove their mettle, flocked to enlist. They were driven by a sense of honor, a desire to defend their homeland, and the promise of glory. There was a widespread belief, shared by both the public and many military leaders, that the war would be over quickly. This optimism was fueled by nationalistic propaganda and the confident assertions of military strategists. Home by Christmas became a common refrain, reflecting the optimism that a decisive victory would be achieved within months. Soldiers and their families clung to this hope, believing that the conflict would be resolved swiftly.
This belief was rooted in outdated military thinking. Many strategists failed to grasp the scale and complexity of modern warfare. The last major European war, the Franco-Prussian War of 1870–71, had been a short, sharp conflict decided by decisive battles. This historical precedent led many to underestimate the challenges ahead. However, the First World War would prove to be a different beast altogether. The advent of new technologies and the scale of the conflict transformed the nature of warfare.
The first few months of the war saw a flurry of military activity. Armies mobilized rapidly, and initial engagements were marked by intense and chaotic battles. Germany's advance through Belgium was swift and brutal, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The German forces moved with precision and determination, but their progress was slowed by fierce Belgian resistance. The Belgians, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought valiantly to defend their homeland. The Battle of the Marne in September 1914 saw the French and British armies halt the German advance on Paris, shattering German hopes for a quick victory in the West. This pivotal battle marked the beginning of a prolonged and grueling conflict. On the Eastern Front, Russia launched an offensive against Germany, forcing the Germans to divert troops from the West. The Eastern Front became a theater of immense and brutal clashes. While initially successful, Russian advances were soon halted by German and Austro-Hungarian forces. The Eastern Front saw a series of bloody and inconclusive battles. The early battles of the war, while bloody, failed to produce a decisive outcome. Both sides dug in, leading to the infamous trench warfare that would define much of the conflict. The stage was set for a long and grueling conflict. The initial optimism of a quick resolution faded as the reality of modern warfare set in. The myth of home by Christmas was shattered, replaced by the grim understanding that this war would be unlike any before it. Shifting sands from mobile warfare to static stalemate. The First World War began with a flurry of movement and strategy as armies sought to outmaneuver each other across vast landscapes. The initial months of the First World War were characterized by mobile warfare, with armies maneuvering over vast distances. Commanders on both sides believed that swift, decisive actions would bring a quick end to the conflict. Cavalry units, infantry, and artillery were all on the move, seeking to exploit weaknesses in the enemy's lines. However, as the war progressed, the nature of combat changed dramatically. The initial strategies of rapid movement and flanking maneuvers gave way to more static and entrenched positions. The landscape of war was being reshaped by new technologies and the sheer scale of the armies involved.
The introduction of new technologies, such as the machine gun and heavy artillery, gave the defense a decisive advantage. These weapons could mow down advancing troops with devastating efficiency, making traditional charges across open ground suicidal. The battlefield became a deadly arena where the old tactics no longer applied. The vast armies of the belligerents, equipped with these deadly weapons, found themselves locked in a stalemate. Trenches were dug, stretching for miles, as both sides sought to protect their soldiers from the relentless firepower. The war had become a grueling test of endurance and resources. Attacks, often launched across open ground, were met with withering fire. Casualties were staggering. The bravery of the soldiers was undeniable, but the cost in human lives was immense. Each side suffered horrendous losses, with little ground gained in return. The Western Front, stretching from the English Channel to Switzerland, became bogged down in a war of attrition. The front lines barely moved, despite the enormous efforts and sacrifices made by the troops. The war had settled into a deadly routine of bombardments, raids, and counterattacks.
The failure of the Schlieffen Plan, Germany's grand strategy for a quick victory, had profound consequences. The plan aimed to quickly defeat France by sweeping through Belgium and then turning to face Russia. However, the plan faltered, leading to a prolonged and grueling conflict on multiple fronts. It led to a protracted two-front war, with Germany facing powerful enemies in both the east and west. The German forces were stretched thin, and the hoped-for quick victory turned into a long and bloody struggle. The Eastern Front saw massive battles and shifting lines, while the Western Front remained largely static. The inability of either side to achieve a decisive breakthrough resulted in a war of attrition, where victory would go to the side with the most resources and the strongest will to endure. The war became a test of industrial capacity and national resolve, with each side trying to outlast the other. The shift from mobile to static warfare marked a turning point in the conflict. The romantic notions of a quick and glorious war were replaced by the harsh reality of trench warfare. Soldiers lived and fought in appalling conditions, facing constant danger from enemy fire, disease, and the elements. The romantic notions of glorious cavalry charges and decisive battles were shattered by the grim reality of trench warfare. The cavalry, once seen as the elite of the army, found themselves largely obsolete in the face of machine guns and barbed wire. The war had become a brutal and grinding struggle. The war had entered a new, more brutal phase. The scale of the destruction was unprecedented, and the human cost was staggering. The soldiers in the trenches faced unimaginable horrors, and the war seemed to have no end in sight. The world was witnessing a conflict unlike any it had seen before. A labyrinth of death. The rise of trench warfare. This new form of combat would come to define the First World War, leaving an indelible mark on history and the collective memory of those who lived through it. As the war on the Western Front stagnated, both sides dug in, seeking protection from the relentless artillery fire and machine gun fire. The initial hope for a quick and decisive victory faded, replaced by the grim reality of a prolonged and grueling conflict. What began as rudimentary ditches and foxholes evolved into a complex system of trenches, stretching for hundreds of miles. These trenches were not just simple holes in the ground, they were intricate networks with frontline support and reserve trenches, connected by communication trenches. Trench warfare became synonymous with the First World War, a symbol of the conflict's brutality and futility. The trenches were a place where soldiers lived, fought and died, often within a few yards of the enemy.
Life in the trenches was a miserable existence. Soldiers faced the constant threat of death, not just from enemy fire, but from the harsh living conditions that made every day a struggle for survival. Soldiers endured cramped and unsanitary conditions, constant bombardment, and the ever-present threat of enemy attack. The trenches were often filled with mud and water, making it difficult to stay dry and warm. Disease was rampant, and the psychological toll of prolonged exposure to such horrors was immense. Trench foot, caused by prolonged exposure to damp and unsanitary conditions, was a common affliction, as were other diseases like dysentery and typhus. Attacks, often preceded by massive artillery bombardments, were typically met with fierce resistance. The no-man's land between opposing trenches was a deadly expanse, littered with barbed wire and the bodies of fallen soldiers. Gains were measured in yards, and casualties were often appalling. The human cost of these assaults was staggering, with thousands of lives lost for minimal territorial gain. The Battle of the Somme, which began in July 1916, epitomized the horrors of trench warfare. It was one of the largest battles of the war, involving over 3 million men and resulting in over 1 million casualties. On the first day of the battle alone, the British Army suffered over 50,000 casualties, making it the bloodiest day in British military history. The scale of the loss was unprecedented and left a lasting impact on the national consciousness.
The development of trench warfare had a profound impact on the duration of the war. It turned what many had hoped would be a short conflict into a prolonged and grueling war of attrition. It created a stalemate that was incredibly difficult to break. The trenches became a formidable barrier, making it nearly impossible for either side to achieve a decisive victory. Both sides poured vast resources into offensives that often yielded little strategic gain. The cost in human lives and material was enormous, with entire generations of young men lost to the war. The trenches became a symbol of the war's futility, a testament to the human cost of this new form of industrialized warfare. They stand as a stark reminder of the horrors of war and the resilience of those who endured it.